Hey, folks. People coming in from all kinds of places: Minnesota, Austin, Texas, Ellensburg, Washington. I'm sure Danny is here, although I didn't see her coming in. I had a gig set up a while back at a little after 4 today, so I thought I would just very briefly talk today, briefly, about a half an hour, and then I will do another one of these. You should decide, and I'm sure there will be divisions, but you should decide if you'd rather have one long one of these a week or two shorter ones. I suppose one long and one short, but that seems like a little bit much of me, to be honest. Anyway, hi, Oxford County. Let me get right into the questions that you really want to know about to begin with. And that is, first of all, what happened with what is sometimes now being called Signal Gate? I am so tired of hearing gate tacked onto everything, but so be it. What happened is that it appears that some of the most senior members of the Donald Trump administration shared plans and planning for the March 15th attack on Yemen through a Signal app, which is an encrypted application on your phone, rather like something like Messenger or the messaging apps that we all use. But the trick to Signal is that it is encrypted at both ends, which means that it's slightly more secure than some of the other commercial ones that are available. It's still absolutely breakable. It's nothing, it's not a huge difference here. But they shared the plans on this Signal chat and talked about what was happening on the Signal chat and appeared to be making decisions without the President of the United States on the Signal chat. That is, at one point, somebody says, well, I think that the president was clear about this, and this is how we should proceed. But they appeared to be making the decision themselves without the president, which is itself a really big deal. But there are a number of reasons why this matters a lot. The first is, of course, what I just said, that there are principles, including the Vice President of the United States and the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of State, the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, the head of the CIA, John Ratcliffe, this group of about 18 people who made the decision to make a military strike on Yemen, on the Houthis in Yemen, who are a group that are sort of like Hezbollah in Lebanon. They're a group of non-state actors in Yemen who have been attacking shipping in the region. So they made this decision. But first of all, the first issue is that they appeared to make the call without the input of the president. But second, although his chief of staff was there, which is interesting. Anyway, so that's the first. The second piece is that they did it over Signal. All right, so the first problem with doing it over Signal is that Signal is not secure. It can be broken and has been broken. We know that the Politico in Europe, which is the European branch of Politico, reported more than a month ago that Russians had broken into Signal. The Russian intelligence agencies had broken into Signal. It's not a secret. It's not a secret communication means of communication. The United States government has secret means of communication. There are different ways that you can talk secretly if you're part of the administration, and but they chose not to do that. They chose to communicate over Signal, and they were very willing to do that. They all jumped in on it, and nobody said, "Hey, this is illegal," which it is. Right? You're not allowed to do that, because you're going to compromise national intelligence, one, and I'll tell you more about that in a second. But two, it appears that one of the reasons, possibly the reason that they used Signal was because you can set Signal to erase messages. And the signals on the group chat were set to erase, some at 1 week and some at 4 weeks. Now, the problem with that is that under the Presidential Records Act and some other acts as well, the government can't operate in secret. It has to preserve what it does. So clearly they intended not to have these things be preserved, not to have these records, which is against the law. And they all were comfortable enough doing that, including the Vice President of the United States, as I say, and the Secretary of State and Secretary of Treasury, and on down the list, that they hopped onto Signal to do it, which they knew was illegal. So all those things are a problem, but now I'm not done. The reason we know about this is because inadvertently they added it appears Mike Walls added a reporter to the chat. So the whole time that they are literally talking about some of the most secret stuff we have in American national security, there's a reporter on the line who, he doesn't have any classified, he doesn't have any security clearances or anything. He just got added, apparently inadvertently, although that's the assumption people are making. And I try not to operate on assumptions, so maybe they wanted him there. I don't know, but the point is, he was absolutely not qualified to be there, to the point that he thought it was a scam, it was disinformation. And just so you know, that's really common in what journalists do, and even what people like I do. We are very frequently fished. That is, somebody pretends to be somebody they are not, to try and get us to say something stupid or to be part of a disinformation campaign. And when that happens, what one does, or what I do anyway, is let it play out a little bit, because what you're really interested in is what the person wants of you. So that itself is a story, but you don't assume that if somebody contacts you that they're who they say they are. I never assume that. And almost always they are, but sometimes they're not. And then you want to know who's trying to set something up. That itself is a story. So there's kind of like this intelligence struggle that goes on. So him doing that is not unusual. That is, I suspect most people in this field have had that kind of contact and have let it play out a little bit to see where it was, and who was doing it, because that itself is a story. So he's letting it play out. And he realizes, when they say they're going to be attacking Yemen, and then they do, that he is in fact on this secret chat, and then he gets out of it. He recognizes that he can't be there because he does not have the security clearance to be there. So they are planning this, and they say on this I'm sorry, I'm as incredulous as everybody else. On this unencrypted, on this unsecure channel, they give the name of a CIA operative, and they talk about American weaponry and the sequence of events. And these are our people. These are people who signed up to the military to protect you and me. And these are the people who, above all, are supposed to be working to keep them safe. And they are literally on this unsecure channel, using their names and telling potential enemies where they're going to be on a chat that we know people like the Russians have already broken into. It is, somebody wrote and said, how serious is this? I literally cannot think of a more extraordinary and dangerous breach of our national security ever. I'm not saying there hasn't been one, because some of them probably are still classified that I wouldn't know about. This is huge. And so that it says a number of things. It is enormously dangerous for us. It also says that they knew they were breaking the law and they didn't care. So there is a level here of incompetence that is off the charts. There is also a level of complete disregard for our laws that is incredible. And then there is this sort of, I hate to say Keystone Cops, but the sheer level of sort of cosplay of, man, we're America and we can do this, without any sense of the responsibility for our troops, for our friends who are in harm's way, is absolutely mind-boggling. And then when you step back from that and recognize that the protection of national security has been such a key part of the rise of Donald Trump and the Republicans, and their insistence that former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton had compromised national intelligence, although it was never compromised, and a Republican-dominated investigation repeatedly, and then finally concluded that she had, well, they said she's been careless, but that there had been no danger from it and no leaks from it. And then, of course, they tried to go after Joe Biden for having previously classified information in his possession from when he was a vice president, which he could have had then. And then at the same time that Trump walked off to Mar-a-Lago with all of that highly classified information, it was always smoke and mirrors. And that is enormously frustrating. But in this moment, for me anyway, when you watch just how cavalier they were, quite literally with the lives of the people who are out there protecting us. Some of my favorite people in the world are out there on those lines, and I suspect a lot of you feel the same way too. That's just unconscionable. And then to have many Republican leaders trying to brush this off as nothing important just shows it's not at all about the country. It's about winning. It's about power, and that is the the issue, the most particular issue here. But I think what we're also seeing is something we need to be very aware of, and that is what the Trump administration is, the space in which it's operating right now, is that it is throwing out the window 80 years of American foreign policy in which we had quite strong and important alliances, including the exchange of intelligence. Our previously Five Eyes intelligence organization with the UK, New Zealand, Canada, Australia, and the US was considered one of the, not one of, considered the strongest in the world. Now, the Five Eyes were already getting nervous about sharing information with the United States because they were concerned it would go right to Russia. Now, come on, who would share intelligence with the United States at this point? I mean, you're virtually guaranteeing that your people are going to be in danger. So why would you do it? So there is this divorce from 80 years of our history. And, you saw this in the chats with JD Vance saying, I just hate to help out Europe. I didn't even know where that's coming from. That's such a rejection of our entire history, at least since World War II, but even long before that. His, it almost feels personal in his case because there's no like long history here that he could say that with a straight face. And then the idea here, of course, is we're switching our allegiance to Russia and to Russia's allies like China and Belarus and Hungary. And that's, I think, leaving us open in a case like this, where it seems possible they didn't care if Russia was listening because they felt like Russia and we were on the same team. I don't know that, but there's a funny, why weren't they concerned when anybody who reads the papers, and mind you, I'm an Americanist. I read the papers like everybody else does in other countries. I read, Politico in Europe, just because one reads Politico in Europe, right? But they're supposed to know this stuff. They knew that. They must have known that, or if they didn't, they shouldn't be in those positions. So there's also this 80-year switch going on that I think is and upending a lot of stuff. And one of the things it's upending is the real talent that we used to have in our intelligence agencies and in our national security system and at the head of our foreign affairs. And we just don't have that anymore. So the question there's a couple of questions you asked that I want to get into quickly here. People have asked, will it matter? I want to start by answering that by talking about Jeffrey Goldberg, who is the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic and somebody whose name most of you probably did not know 2 days ago. And I want to remind you that Jeffrey Goldberg got on that chat by chance, right? It could have been you or me or somebody in Belarus or any number of people who could have been on that chat. Now, I assume he was in the phone of Michael Walls is how he got on there, but we're all on other people's phones, right? The point I'm trying to make here is that he could have done a lot of things. He could have sold that story to a foreign government. He did not do that. He could have taken screenshots, kept his mouth shut, and written a kill-all book in 2 years that would have sold like hotcakes. He could have blackmailed somebody. He didn't do that either. He could have gotten right off the chat and kept his mouth shut. He could have done any number of things that would have made it so none of us knew what had happened here. And what he did was he has taken the extraordinary step and the extraordinarily dangerous step of letting us all know what happened in our names and to us. And I think that's a really important piece of this here, that he's just one guy. And he has a paycheck, and I don't know anything about him. I assume he's got a family. I know he's a good writer, actually. I shouldn't say I know nothing about him. I do read him. But he put his neck out there for the rest of us. And he has changed history because he did the right thing. And it wasn't the easy thing, and it wasn't the thing that would, make him rich. It wasn't the thing that would get him a publishing contract. It wasn't the thing that would make trouble go away. He did the right thing. And when we talk about whether this is going to matter, this is huge. And it should matter to all of us. And I think if you imagine this being any Democratic administration, but even most administrations, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, would already have resigned. So would Michael Waltz, probably Tulsi Gabbard. This is a really big deal. And for the Republicans to be like, as Mike Johnson said last night, well, I'm sure they'll take steps to make sure this never happens again. No. That's ridiculous. These are breaches that all Americans understand. After all, Lock Her Up was about the idea of letting secret information even be available to another country. Not that that happened, but in this case, they literally included somebody without a security clearance on the call, and it was an unsecure call, and they used the names of a CIA officer and war plans. I mean, aside from publishing it in Moscow Today, I don't know how you could have made it more easily accessible to people who wish us ill. And these are things I think that people understand. But here's the kicker, and here's why I wanted to call your attention to. I believe it's Olga Laughton, by the way, who discovered that Steve Witkoff, who is Trump's Ukraine and Russian special envoy, was actually in Moscow when he was on this chat. And at one point, he was kept waiting for many hours by the Kremlin. For all we know, he was, they were keeping him waiting because they were reading his chats anyway. But that's now getting around a lot. But I think it was Olga Laughton, who is a very close follower of Russian events. And it's getting picked up everywhere. And I sort of feel like she ought to get a little credit for that, because I saw it last night, quite late, after midnight last night, from her. And I think she's the one who said, wait a minute, let me check the who's where. And she's the one who followed that. So the reason I mentioned this about Goldberg and Lautman, for that matter, is because these are individual people who are doing the right thing. And one of the problems with the Trump administration is it's hard for stories to stick because there are so many stories. Most administrations try not to have scandals because they don't want the bad press. The Trump administration has gone the other way. It wants scandals constantly because you can't grab hold of anything when everything goes by you so quickly. So what will make this stick is us calling Republican and Democratic leaders, but especially Republican senators who confirmed Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard and John Ratcliffe at DNI. He's at CIA. Tulsi Gabbard's at DNI, who confirmed all these people. And there are lists of those circulating, and they should hear from us until they take the phones off the hook. Because if there's one thing a government is supposed to do, it's keep its people safe. And they are pissing that out the window. I mean, this is the one refrain you heard again and again and again yesterday is we are not safe with these people in charge, and we're not. All right. So, my emphasis there, and I'm watching the clock here because I want to get to two other things quickly here. My emphasis here is don't let this go. Don't let any of it go. I'm still mad about the fact he gave blanket pardons to the January 6th rioters. And there's plenty of stuff to get mad about, but don't lose hope on this, because the level of incompetence here and the amount of trouble that they are causing is not going to get better. It's going to get worse. And we need to speak up about that, and not to think that, I'm seeing so many people saying it's not going to matter. It's not going to matter. It's going to matter if we insist it matters. And that includes, by the way, I would say, complaining to media outlets that are barely mentioning it. It was on the front page of the New York Times today. It was just a column. It wasn't the headline. It was just a column. And again, in terms of importance, remember how much traction they gave to Hillary Clinton's emails, which turned out to be a nothing burger. By the way, and this is an aside I don't have the time for, but what the heck? If you want to read the report on Hillary Clinton's emails, it's ridiculously hard to find. It is public, but if you just Google it, at least last time I tried, it doesn't come up. It is public, though. The way you have to get to it is you have to go in through Chuck Grassley, who was the leader of the committee at the time that was looking into that. You go in through his website, and then you can find it in there. That's where it lives. And you can read the whole thing there. And I wrote about this, by the way. It came out in October of 2020, I think it was. No, October of 2019. And you can read the whole thing and you will see they're like, kind of a nothing burger here, but they hid it because they'd put so much effort into making it become such a big deal. So the trick here will be to make sure that we continue to make it a big deal. I want to get on to the stories that we missed because of that, though. And I'm really torn tonight because tonight is a really important historical anniversary that I always like to honor. It's the night of the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. And that's really important because that's what led to the Social Security Act, among other things. But I'm torn because the piece that I wanted to write last night and the story of the Signal chat took up all my space, is that there was another scandal yesterday, and now there's another one today, and they're getting not a lot of oxygen, and these are important too. The one I wanted to write about yesterday was a story from 2 days ago, I think it was, maybe 3 days ago now, by Jacob Bogage of the Washington Post, in which he broke the story that then later got picked up by Talking Points Memo and then by the New Republic and by a number of other places as well, that because the so-called Department of Government Efficiency has fired so many people, and the cuts that the Republicans have made to the IRS, says that the senior people in the IRS say that the IRS is going to the government is going to gather through tax revenue $500 billion with a B. That's $500 billion less than it was projected to last year. So essentially, they have thrown away $500 billion. Now let's think about where we think that money is going to come from. The people who are going to be the ones who aren't paying their taxes, those are going to be the very wealthy people that the Biden administration had worked so hard to claw back from them the taxes they weren't paying. And they had actually come up with billions and billions and billions of dollars that they had managed to get people to cough up because they hadn't been paying their taxes. Because if you can afford a whole bunch of accountants to play footsie for a while, you can actually continue to hold back your taxes. And that's what the Department of Government Efficiency has done, is it's gotten rid of the people who are in the divisions that make sure the very wealthy people pay their taxes. So it's not normal people, it's not ordinary people who are going to be getting those, being able to cheat on their taxes. That $500 billion is going to come from you and me. And it's going to come from the programs that we care about. I mean, think about that. That money would have covered so many of the things that they have cut. So that's a major scandal that we need to be paying attention to. But there is also this one. And this one, I think, is something everybody needs to be paying attention to, obviously. But not just because of what I'm going to tell you, but how they are doing it. That is, Social Security is in real trouble. And by that, I don't mean the funding of it, which is solvable quite easily. But the programs itself have been so messed with, and the firings have been so extensive that the computer system crashed 4 times last week. And it's looking like the whole system is going to fall apart, which is what Martin O'Malley, who ran it under the Biden administration, says is going to happen. It's kind of like a Jenga tower. You pull enough blocks out, the whole thing collapses. So we have the problem of the IRS throwing away $500 billion. We have the problem of the fact that the Social Security Administration looks like it's going to be in real problems going forward. There's also problems with the VA, and of course there's the going forward problem of the expected cuts to Medicaid, because it is not possible for the Republicans to cut the $880 billion over 10 years they have been charged with cutting from the department that oversees Medicaid without actually cutting Medicaid. So the emphasis I wanted to make there was that the the Republicans are insisting they're not going to touch Social Security. They're insisting that, and they're not going to make cuts to Social Security. And I think what they're doing is they're hollowing out the system enough that it's just going to collapse under its own weight. The same way that U.S. aid. I mean, they pulled a lot out of U.S. aid, so that's maybe not the perfect analogy, but what we should be looking here is this, pulling out all the sticks until the whole thing collapses. So while we were busy being aghast at the Signal chat, the unsecure Signal chat that included a reporter on it, I'm still mind boggled by that. They were also, the news came and sort of disappeared, but you should look for this story, and I will write about it, that we're going to be 500 billion, they're projecting $500 billion short from what we expected just 2 months ago because of the cuts that they have made. So rather than the Department of Government Efficiency actually saving us money, what it is pretty clearly doing is simply gutting the administration and gutting the government so that the rich people can have more. And that's, I think, perhaps the whole story here, that what we're seeing is the complete destruction of the American government that we've had for the last 80 years or 100 years, even if you want to reach all the way back to 1933. And by dismantling that, they're going to take what is left of it, and it's going to be bought up by the very wealthy. And we're going to get the kind of oligarchy that you see in Russia, unless we continue to protest. And the numbers that are turning out for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, the representative from New York, and Bernie Sanders, the independent senator of Vermont, are huge. And those matter. And so do the Tesla protests. So do everybody showing up, calling your representatives, working throughout your state governments. And we've got a major state Supreme Court election coming up on April 1st in Wisconsin. We have two representative elections of Republican seats in Florida coming up as well. We still have the fight going on in North Carolina where a Republican is trying to steal a Supreme Court seat that was won by a Democrat. These are all places to put muscle. And across the country in all states, school boards, town elections, state elections, organizing within the states as well as at the national and regional level to make it really clear that this is not the government we want. I want to emphasize again that of voters, people who actually were able to vote in the 2024 election, Trump did not win the majority of voters. The majority of people voted for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz or a third candidate. So this idea he has a mandate is ridiculous. And a lot of the people who voted for him did not vote for the policies that they're getting. So this idea somehow that this is something people wanted is simply wrong. So one of the reasons I wanted to hop on today is I want to really put some heart in people in that this is not a juggernaut. This is a place where clearly we have a president who is disengaged to the point that he was not on, they apparently made the decision without a lot of input from him to have a military strike in Yemen. Then later on, he said he didn't know what anybody was talking about, which is either he was lying or he's completely out to lunch. He also recently said he was not the person who signed the executive order for invoking the 1798 Alien Enemies Act, which has led to the extradition of the extraordinary renditions of these Venezuelan men to El Salvador. I mean, you got a president here who is not seemingly connected to what's happening. You have Elon Musk, who is in real trouble with Tesla and who is just creating havoc within the Department of Government Efficiency. The Republicans are split among themselves in Congress, where they're supposed to be legislating, but they can't agree on anything. And what they are doing is enormously unpopular. It is enormously unpopular. So the last thing we want to do right now is to roll over and play dead. And I want to emphasize here that this is not about being a Republican or an independent or a Democrat. This is about defending American democracy against a very small group of largely wealthy people who are trying to take over our country for themselves, and they don't appear to care who gets hurt in the process. So I wanted to hop on today and urge you to continue to care and to continue to speak up and to have heart, because honestly, I don't know the man, and I probably sound like I'm his best friend. I've literally never been in a room with him. What Jeffrey Goldberg did really mattered, and he didn't have to do it. He really could have just been quiet, erased the chat, and said, I was never here. And instead, he really put his neck out. And you think of how many of us there are on this side of democracy. And the more of us who put our neck out like that, even to stand up for someone like him, the better the chance that we really can get this country back and start to do what we really should be doing, which is arguing about policy, not about whether or not democracy should survive. Okay, thanks for being here. I'm going to run now, but if you like the shorter version, I'm happy to do more shorter versions. And I'm going to keep continuing to build here on YouTube and doing a bunch of different stuff. We have more of those interviews coming up now. And so far, we've got a really cool list of people. It's fun. Once we started thinking of people I wanted to talk to, it's not your usual list, but they're all interesting people. All right. Thank you for being here, and I will see you soon. Hey, folks, I am hoping that you can hear me. And if somebody could throw that into the chat, that would be helpful. We got people here from Iowa. Hey, Danny, how are you? Oh, but Danny, you're on Facebook. All right. So you probably have heard, if you're here, that something's really funny going on today with my posts. My guess is that they are being shadow banned, which means that some people can see them and some people cannot. I cannot. So I didn't call for questions today for Politics Chat on Facebook, because anytime I post on Facebook, it's the weirdest thing. It just goes away. I mean, I can see it on my screen for a second and then it goes away and I can't get it back. So looks like some people are here from Facebook, and some people are able to find me over there by Googling my name and the date, and then Facebook, or sometimes by hitting the magnifying glass so that you can search. But one of the things that I would love it if people would do is, I've spent a lot of time this afternoon trying to figure out where my next move is. And obviously I'm moving to YouTube, which I'm thrilled to be doing. And YouTube's got a lot of opportunities for stuff I can do over here that I'm excited by. And I'm also on Substack. I would urge you, if you want to get my posts or to read what I write, to remember that you can go to the Letters from an American website, which is hosted on Substack, and you can always read there. They're always posted there, and they are free. There is no paywall. And if you want them delivered to your email, that you sign up there. And the trick to that is they too are free unless you want to comment. The reason I put a paywall on it was because, not a paywall. The reason I asked people to subscribe is you have to subscribe to comment, so I didn't get the same trolls that I get on Facebook. And so if you do that, I think, I can't always see because I go in the back door, but I think they will ask for your credit card information. Do not put that in. You do not have to put that in. Everything that I do is free, because for me, this is not about starting a media company or anything else. This is literally about getting information out there. So the more that you can share stuff and tell people that it's free, take clips of me, do anything that you want that you think is valuable. I think a lot of, as we go forward, I suspect we're going to need to do a lot of sort of ground level networking, because I think the big guns are not always going to be on our side. So we'll see what happens on Facebook. I will continue to post there because some people can see it. More people cannot. So it just is what it is. So let's move forward today. I'm sorry I couldn't take questions, but I think I have a decent idea of what people might be wondering about. And I want to start with something that I have not written an entire letter about, because focusing solely on it. I've mentioned it a lot of times, but solely because it's going to be a really big letter and an important letter, and I need to get it right. So you will notice, by the way, if you're keeping track in your head, as I do, there are a lot of times that you're like, why isn't she talking about this? This is a really big deal. And the reason that I'm not talking about it, except in this case, obliquely or in little snippets, is because it is a really big deal. I know it's going to get a lot of eyeballs, and I need to do it really, really, really right. And that's going to take 9, 10, 12 hours. And if a number of things happen in a certain day, I can't then, there's only 24 hours in a day. So I can't then add 12 hours of research onto something. So what I want to talk about today is what we are calling deportations, but that are not in fact deportations. Because deportations mean that the United States government picks you up and takes you or sends you back to your country of origin. And what the Trump regime has been doing is taking people that they have identified, and I'm going to unpack that in a second, as threats to the United States. And they're sending them to a very large super prison for people that are called terrorists in El Salvador. And many of the people that have been sent to El Salvador, to this prison, are not from there. They're actually from Venezuela, and they thought they were being deported, that is, sent home. And just to pull back a little bit on that, the reason that this is in the news right now, and the reason that people are upset about it, I keep getting emails from people saying, well, you just want murderers and rapists on the streets. And that's just stupid. I mean, nobody wants murderers and rapists on the streets. But the reason that people like me are extremely concerned and getting more concerned every day about what is happening is because the Trump administration, it's not clear who did this, by the way, has relied on a law from 1798 called the Alien Enemies Act to justify expelling people that they call members of a Venezuelan gang, which is abbreviated as TDA. And the reason that matters is because that law, the Alien Enemies Act, goes into effect when the United States is under attack or is at war. And this is again 1798, and it happened during a time when the United States really was under attack, and so on and so forth. But the Trump administration has made the argument that because members of a Venezuelan gang have come into the United States, they are working in league, and this is not me saying this, this is the administration saying this, they are working in league with the Venezuelan government, which says this is ridiculous. The Venezuelan government, by the way, is no prize. But what they're saying is that the Trump administration is considering the United States that it is being invaded by Venezuela because of alleged gang members in the country. And if they can make that argument, they can then say that people who are over 14, that's the age cutoff in the law, people who are over 14 can be rounded up, imprisoned, and gotten rid of, because that's the way the law was written. But there's a couple of problems with that. The first is that the idea that we are under attack by Venezuela is it just doesn't stand up. And if you let the administration say that, they could say we're under attack by any country that is sending people to the United States. Because there's no, they just sort of declared it. And crucially, Donald Trump has denied that he's the one who signed that executive order. He said, I don't know anything about it. I didn't sign it. I wasn't part of that. Well, who did that? Right? So something's either Trump doesn't know what he's doing, or he's just running away from it, or somebody else is calling the shots in the White House, or all three. But there is that problem. But here's the other really big problem. And that's that we now know, because this is in court, and there's a lot of filings that are happening every day. And as I say, this is one of the reasons I haven't devoted an entire letter to it, is that I have to read all these filings to get it right. And there are a lot of them. And there's a lot of legal stuff going on. And I'm not a lawyer. I don't want to get it wrong. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a scholar who studies this stuff. So I know how to read it and I know what they're talking about. But this is the law. You don't want to get it wrong. So the issue here is that the administration, the immigration and Customs Enforcement agency or division had a checklist to decide who they considered members of a gang. It had a point system, and there was a certain number of points. I think it was 4 points if you had a tattoo that ICE agents considered a gang symbol, even though people who study this particular gang says it doesn't operate on tattoo symbols. And that you got points if you used what they called gang symbols, and you got points if you were associated with somebody who was in this gang, and if you Venmoed the money, and so on and so forth. But the point system was such that it's entirely subjective. And what appears to have happened is it appears that members of the US government rounded up people who really didn't have anything to do with this gang. And as I say, rather than sending them back to Venezuela, incarcerated them without any judge looking over it or court looking over it or anything. They basically said, dude is a gang member. He's going to prison, to this maximum security real hellhole in El Salvador. All right. So, but I'm not done yet. That itself is a huge problem, because we in the United States, and anybody who is in the United States, has the right to what's called the due process of the law. That is, the government can't just say, we hate you, you're out, or we hate you, we're going to throw you in prison. We have the Constitution and the laws which say you can't do that. And this is exactly what they've done. They've rounded people up and said, we consider you gang members, so we're going to throw you in prison. But now there was a story that came out, I think it was yesterday, in the Atlantic, about an individual who was sent to this prison in El Salvador. It's called CCOT. He was a legal resident. So this is not somebody who was simply undocumented. This is somebody who he had legal papers to be here. A judge had seen him. A judge had looked at his case. A judge had said, yeah, you're welcome to be here. And he does not have a criminal record. He is married to an American citizen, and he has a child who is an American citizen. And they swept him up. You can look him up. His name is Kilmar Abrego Garcia. And they swept him up and they sent him to this prison. And his wife recognized him in the tapes, because they didn't tell people who they had taken. And he has a lawyer. And the lawyer said to the government, get him back. This was illegal. He was legally able to be here. And what the United States government is saying, and you can see it, by the way, in the notes that I wrote last night, except you can't get them if you're on Facebook, but they're on Substack. You can read this. It's the court listeners, where anything that has an introduction that says court listener, you can those are public, and you can click on those and you can read them. And the way they're set up is they lay out the history of what happened at the very beginning. Now, the particular one that I'm sending you to is written by the government, so you kind of have to read between the lines, because they're trying to make a case, even though there isn't a case there. So they say things that make it sound as if he has done something bad, but in fact, that if you read the Atlantic article, you'll know that that's just the way the thing was written. He doesn't have a record. None of that stuff. But here's the kicker. What the government is arguing is that they shouldn't have taken him. They say it was an administrative error. An administrative error. This man is now in prison in El Salvador for an administrative error. But they say, because he is outside the bounds of the United States, they sent him outside the bounds of the United States. There's nothing they can do about it. That American law no longer obtains, and oopsie poopsie, the government can't fix it. This is like a whole factory of red flags, because what they are saying is, yeah, we shouldn't have sent him. He had rights here. He was supposed to be here legally. It was a mistake, but we can't fix it. So too bad. And if you recognize what we're talking about here, that's a huge problem. And then, of course, there are the people who are now in danger of losing their visas, especially students who came here, because the administration is using AI to scrub the internet to see if they have ever said anything that is against the Trump administration. And those people, too, have been picked up on the street, not knowing that they were anything other than, going to one woman is going to a meal. and as far as she knew, had a visa that said she could be there, that she hadn't done anything wrong. She had written an op-ed for her school newspaper, and plainclothesmen picked her up off the street, and they sent her to prison, not to the terrorism center in El Salvador, but to prison in Louisiana. The idea that the government does not have to go through the courts and it can simply decide who is a gang member is fascism. I mean, that the idea that the government can do that. And again, today or yesterday, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said, well, we know these people are gang members. I've seen the evidence. ICE has seen the evidence. I've seen the evidence. Well, here's a newsflash. The whole reason we have a court system is so the government can't say, yeah, you're a criminal, because that's exactly what an authoritarian government does. You stand against us, you're a criminal, you're going to prison, or we'll disappear you in some fashion. So if you have not been concerned until now, you need to be concerned, and you need to speak up against this, because this is not a question of being a Democrat or independent or a Republican or anything else. We are literally built as a nation on the rule of law. And if Caroline Leavitt or Stephen Miller or any of the people in the administration can say, well, I know he's a gang member, so I'm right in sending him outside of the country, and then can say, oh, shoot, we got the wrong guy, but it's too late. He's going to spend his life in prison. I sort of feel like I shouldn't have to finish that sentence, but I will say nobody is safe. If that is the way that they are operating, nobody is safe. And that's, I'll be doing a lot more with that. But you should be watching it. You should be out there protesting it, because quite literally, I mean, again, especially people who are not accustomed necessarily to thinking of the government as being dangerous or our enemy. Just sit for a minute and think about the people in your life, the people you love, and think about what would happen if the government came in and took a look at your nephew, your sister, whomever, and could just take them away and say, well, she's an enemy. He's an enemy. And that you had no recourse. You had no way to get them back, because that's where we are. When you start to take people without due process, that's where we are. Now, that's not to say you should keep everybody who has committed crimes or whatever. We have systems for that. That's what the law is supposed to do. You're supposed to say this person committed a crime, or I think this person committed a crime, so I'm going to take it to court. And the courts, we're going to decide whether or not this person committed a crime. And if they do, they have to serve a sentence and so on. That's not the same thing as saying, I've decided he committed a crime, so I'm throwing him into prison without any due process. And if you see on right-wing media or in my email, people say, well, you just want to leave murderers and rapists running loose around the country. And of course, that is not the case. I want to see the rule of law enforced for everyone, the very poorest Americans and the very richest Americans and everybody in between. But what we are seeing right now is really deeply problematic. I'm actually going to end up somewhere cheerful today, but I'm going to tell you some more bad stuff first. The next thing is the government is being completely gutted. If you have not seen the news today, we've got more hits to the Department of Health and Human Services. There's been purges of the National Institutes of Health. I just can't even believe I'm saying this. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Food and Drug Administration, all the sorts of things that the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., said he would not do during his confirmation hearings, he is doing. And those purges are going dramatically to affect public health. That's on top, of course, of the purges that we have seen in all the other aspects of the U.S. government. And once again, just to be very clear, these are illegal purges. That is the way our system works. So we got three branches of government. The first in the Constitution, Article 1. So when you hear Article 1 powers, Article 2 powers, Article 3 powers, this is what that means. Article 1 is the first section of the Constitution, and it sets out Congress, the House of Representatives, and the Senate House of Representatives turns over every 2 years entirely because it's supposed to be close to the people. The Senate turns over only a third every 2 years. So theoretically, fully every 6 years. So it moves much more slowly. And that's who writes the laws. Just a little aside, but that actually matters. Only the House of Representatives can write a law that has anything to do with revenue. That by the Constitution, the House of Representatives has to be the one that looks at revenue. They're the people who write the laws. That's it. They're the people who write the laws. Nobody else. In the national level, and the state level, of course, state legislatures do, but they're the ones who write the laws. The second article in the Constitution, Article 2, is what sets out how the president operates. And what the president is charged with doing is faithfully executing the laws. All right. And then the third section is the judicial branch of government. And that, I always joke, they spent a lot of time on Article 1, a little bit less time on Article 2. And by Article 3, they're like, hey, dude, I'm hungry. Let's just say we're going to have some courts and leave. The Article 2 powers of the court are not fully articulated. And they became much more fully articulated after 1803, when the court took upon itself the right of judicial review, the right to say, hey, that's not constitutional, or that is. That's not in the Constitution itself. The courts take it upon themselves. If you've ever heard of the case Marbury versus Madison, 1803. That's why that case is so important. That's what gives the courts the right of judicial review. But the reason I just laid all that out is because it has been established both constitutionally by the courts and finally in the Impoundment Control Act of 1974 that the executive branch cannot get rid of a department that Congress has established, and it cannot withhold appropriations that Congress has given to those agencies. So when the administration came in and started cutting U.S. aid, for example, that is explicitly illegal. It has been found so by the courts. It's illegal under the 1974 Impoundment Control Act. And the people who authored Project 2025, and one of the key authors of Project 2025 is now directing Trump's Office of Management and Budget. His name is Russell Vogt. He explicitly says, this is we think it's unconstitutional. The courts don't, but we do. So we're just going to go ahead and do it. And we're going to hope that the courts agree with us, with this Supreme Court, where Trump put 3 of the people on the Supreme Court. So the other thing that you're seeing in this moment is this, real gutting of the government that serves all of us. And you're also seeing, of course, real attacks on Social Security and Medicaid and possibly supplemental nutrition programs. All right, so you've got then a major attack on the courts and on the rule of law, major attack on the government itself. The economy, we got some issues here with the economy. Inflation is rising. And what that means is that prices are getting a lot higher right now. And that's happening in part because of these tariffs. And Trump has said he's going to whack us with a whole bunch more tariffs tomorrow. But it's also going to cause real issues in this country that they've laid off so many people, and that it appears that we have essentially destroyed our tourism industry, which is worth about $200 billion a year. So, for example, flights from from Canada to the United States are off by about 70% so far this year. And there are, Florida, for example, and Maine, places like that, the middle of the country, the Great Lakes, are used to a lot of tourism from Canada, and not anymore. And similarly, Europeans, actually, a number of European countries have put warnings against coming to the United States. But then we also have these more tariffs coming down, and you can see that people are really nervous about the government because of the Consumer Confidence Index, which is the lowest it's been in more than 12 years, but also by the stock market. And the stock market, for a millionth time, is not the economy. But what it does say is it gives a sense of people who are investing how confident they are about the future. And the stock market is crazy rocky, and it's dropping overall. So we have this real issue with the economy as well. And one of the things that that is that I'm not sure that people are aware enough of is that if in fact you cut Medicaid, you cut Social Security, you cut these jobs and so on, it's not just that the people whose jobs are lost are going to be hurting. Medicaid, for example, supports most of the people who are in elder care. And if you pull that out of the economy, you're going to collapse a lot of nursing homes. And similarly, if you get rid of Social Security, you're going to be doing things like collapsing and supplemental nutrition programs. You're going to be badly hurting the people that we call downstream. So the supermarkets, the mom and pop stores, and so on. So you're seeing this real contraction in the economy, and we'll see those numbers are not good today, and we'll see what they look like tomorrow. Now, after Trump announces what he calls his Liberation Day. All right. So then the next thing I want to bring up is foreign affairs. And the United States is now aligned with Vladimir Putin's Russia against countries like Ukraine, and is madly picking fights, not only with Europe, but with our allies not only picking fights with Europe, but also now threatening to invade one of our allies, and that's Greenland. Greenland is an autonomous island that belongs to Denmark. Denmark is one of our oldest and staunchest allies. It lost more people per capita during the Gulf War supporting the U.S. than any other country. I believe it's any other country. It's certainly more than the United States. And the Trump administration is making it very clear it intends to take take Greenland. And the reasons for that are because Greenland is very well located, and with climate change, you're getting melting in the Arctic, and that means that there's going to be a lot more activity around the upper side of Greenland. Also, Greenland has a lot of rare earth minerals that are important for computers, for example, that the United States wants. And then finally, it's important. This is a really important piece of it. What is central to the United Nations and has been respected as well as part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, is that countries will respect each other's boundaries. That's been central to the post-World War II international order, that you couldn't just say, I'm going to take that country. And that's not to say that everybody lived happily ever after and that people didn't cause trouble and, et cetera. But it did mean that countries like the United States tried to uphold the principle that people's sovereignty needed to be protected. And if the United States attacks Greenland, tries to take over Greenland, that's out the window, in the sense that all of a sudden then Vladimir Putin can say, well, I'm just taking Ukraine. I'm just taking the Crimea, which belongs to Ukraine. And that breakdown in the international order absolutely serves somebody like Vladimir Putin. So you look at all this, and and I'm just starting. Somebody just said Denmark has zero claim to Greenland. Get the trolls out of here. I got to tell you, my patience is done, because what I just laid out here, if I had told you 3 months ago that the United States was going to look like this in 3 months, what would you have told me had happened? The United States is being dismantled without a shot. We are losing our country to a very small group of radicals who are tearing it apart piece by piece. And I think one of the reasons that everybody is a little bit shell-shocked is we cannot believe this is happening. If an army had poured over our shores, we would be aware of what was happening and we would fight back, but we're just watching it melt away and slip through our fingers. And so that was all the bad news. So where am I finding the good news? I think that things happened quickly enough that people didn't really understand what was happening. But at least for me, the pulling people off the streets and saying they do not have to give them due process is there is no excuse for it. There's just none. So they've been talking about stopping waste and fraud and abuse, which is stupid. They haven't done any of that. That's all fake. Musk is out there buying an election. There's all this stuff that is just crap. But there was at least a little bit of an excuse. You could maybe look the other way. When they take somebody who is here legally and throw them into prison in a third country that not their country, but I'm sorry, no, he is from El Salvador, but throw him into prison when he hasn't committed any crimes. And then they say it was an administrative error, but we can't fix it. That's not the United States of America that I want to be part of. So that's the good news, I think, is that it's no longer possible to look away. And let me turn next to Cory Booker, who has been standing at this point on the floor of the Senate for close to 22 hours, finally saying something must be done. This is important, and we're losing our country. And a lot of people have been talking a lot, and we've been seeing these, the Tesla takedowns, and we've been seeing a lot of pushback that was not being reported very well. And in fairness to people trying to report this moment, it's hard because people need to know about the stuff that I just told you, because that literally can affect their survival. It's a little bit less important for them to know about protests because that's not going to potentially land them in prison in another country. So people are not reporting the protests perhaps as much as we should, just because it's constantly, you need to know about this, you need to know about this, and that kind of falls by the wayside. You can find out about them on social media. There are photographs and so on. And I will try to do more with that. But the fact that Cory Booker is standing up the way he is today, on the same day that there is a pushback among Republicans against the tariffs, because they actually care about the economy. And they're starting to say, dude, you can't do this. Even though the Republicans tried to lock in the idea that Trump can do whatever he wants with tariffs. It's a little bit of a rabbit hole here, but actually Congress, I just told you, Congress is the only group that's supposed to be able to make a law. There's a little bit of a loophole in that there is a way for the president to be able to adjust tariffs very quickly if something happens. So, for example, if all of a sudden there is a very quick need to protect something or not, to make it easier for somebody to get something, if there's an emergency or whatever, the president can do that. He's not supposed to be able to set tariff policy. That's Congress's business, is to set tariff policy. But the Republicans put into that extended funding bill a couple of weeks ago that for the purposes, the way you stop, if a president does that, starts to use his tariff power, the way you stop that is somebody makes a statement on the floor of Congress and says, we got to take a look at this. And there's 3 days before you have to look at it and take a vote, whether or not the president can do that. And so the Republicans put in that extended funding bill that for the purposes of tariffs, days are not going to change for the rest of this Congress. So it literally says, for the purposes of the tariff clause of this law, we're not going to see the passage of any days. It's going to be a single day for the rest of Congress, which, I wrote about because I thought that's the sort of thing that people would wake up and go, for God's sake, if you're having to say that a day is not a day, then you're really pushing things here. Anyway, enough Republicans are concerned about what Trump might do tomorrow that they are starting to push back against that. And I haven't been able to read about that today because I was here. And I was here trying to figure out what was going on with the Facebook. So there is the fact that people are speaking up. They're starting to speak up, and they are really making it very clear that they won't stand for the immediate things of what is going on. And I'm going to say a little more about that in a minute. But there is also the fact that the courts really are standing against the Trump administration. And the administration keeps painting them out to be, what does Trump say? Radical left Marxists or whatever. Literally, the judge who is dealing with the cases of the people who have been not deported, but rendered to an El Salvador prison. He was appointed by George W. Bush, and that means that he is affiliated much more with the right than with the left. He's then promoted under Obama, which I think speaks well of Obama that he promoted this guy, but he's actually not. He was appointed by a Republican. So those people are looking at what Trump is doing and what the administration is doing, and they are pushing back against it. Now, just as a little bit of an aside on that, I think if you watch Trump, you see he is not doing well mentally. And it's not clear to me how much he is aware of in terms of what's happening in his names. So, for example, when they asked him about Signalgate, he was like, I don't know anything about it. I wasn't there. You have to ask somebody who was involved. And it's like, literally, this was an airstrike against a country. You ought to know what was going on. But there are a number of different voices in the administration. Russell Vought at Office of Management and Budget, Stephen Miller, who is the Deputy White House Chief of Staff, who seems to be behind the deportations, along with Kristi Noem. And there is Elon Musk, who is pretty clearly the head of the Department of Government Efficiency, although he denies that he is. All right, so the courts are holding as well, not entirely, and the Supreme Court is suspect, but there is that. There's also the fact that for all the large law firms that we are seeing cave, there are a number of law firms that are standing up to defend the rule of law, and for all the universities that we are seeing cave, there are a number that are not. And as I said to somebody recently, courage is contagious. And the more we cheer those people on, the more they will continue to do it. So just think for a minute right now about Cory Booker, Senator from New Jersey, Cory Booker, who's the one doing it's not a filibuster because he's not stopping a piece of legislation, which is the technical definition of a filibuster. He's just simply garnering headlines, and other Democrats are helping him. Well, some people are sort of poo-pooing it and saying it's not doing any good. Well, on the other hand, he's got tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people watching him and listening to him doing what is essentially a political moment, sort of saying, you need to listen to this, you need to pay attention to this. Well, the more positive feedback he gets for doing that, the more likely other people will do it as well. And this is, for somebody who watches politics, this kind of action, this kind of calling attention to things by our elected leaders is enormously important. You and I, we don't have a lot of effect doing that. Our elected leaders doing that has a very big effect. But where we have a big effect is also important. And that's that, as I'm going to emphasize this again, in our Constitution, the source of power for the American government is us. Literally, if you think about a government and that a government has power, where does the power come from? And in the United States of America, the power literally comes from we the people. That's the beginning of our Constitution. It's not just a pretty phrase. It says we the people have established this government, and this is how the government's going to work. And if it stops serving us, we the people can take that power back. And the thing that matters when you speak up, and when you call your legislators, and when you show up at protests, and when you talk to your friends, and when you are very visible, the reason it matters is because what you are saying, even to Republican leaders who aren't going to listen to you, because some of them aren't. But by the way, they're not all MAGA. The Republicans are not all MAGA, especially in the Senate. Only about 14 of them are MAGA in the Senate. The rest are hoping that all the problems go away. But what that says is that you don't have our support. You do not have the support of the American people behind you. And recent polls coming out say that Trump is what we call underwater. which means that more people disapprove of him than approve of him. And his approval ratings are below 50%, which, everyone always says, why does he have so much support? And you shouldn't have that so much support. But a couple of things about that. But the first one about that is that he's only 2 months in his administration. This is called the honeymoon. This is as good as it gets. And he's already underwater, which doesn't speak well for the next 3.5 years. But the other thing that you will see is, so for example, if you actually read down in polls, they often don't say what you think they do. So there were a number of stories out yesterday, I guess, about how Americans like Trump's immigration policies. But then if you actually read down into what are called the crosstabs, what it says is that 71% of Americans do not want the administration to take people who are here legally. Only 29% think that's a good idea. 71% think it's a bad idea. So how do you think it's a bad idea and support his immigration policies? You don't know what's going on. You don't know that this poor Kilmar Abrego Garcia is sitting in prison in El Salvador because he's sort of the poster child for why you have due process and why you don't want to somebody just yanked off the street. So one of the things that speaking up and protests do is that they will make people say, and believe me, I know 2 MAGA people who said to me directly, I'm all for getting rid of undocumented, of the criminals. I want to get rid of the criminals, not the people who've lived here for a long time, they didn't know we already had a process for getting rid of criminals, but this guy was not a criminal. And the MAGA people that I talked to would have said this guy should not have gone. So part of speaking up is making sure people truly understand what is happening, which, by the way, to push this back is one of the reasons that the fact that I appear to be being shadow banned on Facebook is a real problem, because I explain a lot of this stuff. Because to me, it's not about modern politics for me. It's about America, and it's about our history, and it's about how things work. And I feel like if you know how things work, you can come up with solutions pretty easily. But the way that you get politicians in power who do whatever they expletive want is they make sure people don't understand what's happening. So to see my posts disappear, what that says is it's going to be harder for people to understand what's happening. And actually, I think last night I wrote about Abrego Garcia. Anyway, so those are my new system doesn't actually have a clock, but I'll do the best I can here. So this is those protests, people speaking up, and all those guardrails trying to hold are helpful. So is the media, in the sense that, yes, a lot of media has caved, but not all. And the indies are doing, the independent media is doing fabulous work. But so are, lately we've had major breaking stories from the Washington Post. We've had, they're the ones, you know what, I shouldn't tell you who broke certain stories because I probably will screw that up. But the Washington Post has had major breaking stories. The Atlantic has had 2 major breaking stories, Signalgate and this story about Abrego Garcia. The Rolling Stone has had fabulous stuff, but then also the indies. Aaron Rupar's Popular Information is great. The Contrarian, the Bulwark, Judd Legum. I'm sorry, I might have gotten the name of his. I think of him by name. Unfortunately, I don't think of the names of their publications. Laura Rosen at Diplomatic. They're Joyce White Vance at Civil Discourse. There's fabulous actual independent work being done, and they're holding the line, and that really matters, because what we're seeing, I think, is this real shift in the United States between a period when it was very hard to understand what's happening to this new period when you do get good information from sources that didn't exist in 2016. And that revolution in media, I think, is helping us as well. So support those people. And again, one of the reasons that I'm free, I mean, it's a mission in my book, give that money to somebody else, so that, you know, somebody who's barely making it, so that they can step up and continue to publish, because they're doing really good work. Josh Marshall at Talking Points Memo, he's independent. Anyway, I'll stop. But that media stuff really, really, really matters. All right, so how do you know any of this is having any effect? Well, first of all, let's start with the fact that in Louisiana last week, 4 amendments to the Constitution that were being pushed by the Republicans all failed. All failed. All 4 of them failed, which was considered by politicos a rejection of the Republican government. But I'm not done. Elise Stefanik, a Republican representative from New York, had been tapped by Trump to be his ambassador to the UN. And she was like ready to go. She had pictures taken of herself with people going, I'm off to my new job, you know. And he had to pull that nomination because he's afraid, or his people are afraid, that he will not be able to hold that seat. Now, that's a seat that I believe was plus 17 Republican in 2024. So the fact that he's concerned about holding that seat is a sign that they're aware that things are deeply problematic. But I'm not done yet. So we also have the 2 elections happening today in Florida, District 1 and District 6 in Florida. Those are the districts held by Matt Gaetz, who was the representative from Florida, the MAGA representative from Florida, whom Trump tapped to be his attorney general, but had to pull that nomination because Gaetz was an ethics investigation, a House ethics investigation from Republicans, said that Gaetz had been implicated in both sexual assault, I think. Scratch that. Sexual activity and drug activity. And I don't remember. It's been a long time since I read it. And so he not only, Trump pulled the nomination for attorney general, but also Gaetz resigned from the House because he didn't want to have to deal with that. And so that one was up. That's District 1. And then District 6 is Mike Waltz. Now, Mike Waltz is the guy who left the House to become Trump's national security advisor, who is the one who started the Signal chat. And the Signal chat is the one where they were discussing an airstrike on the Houthis in Yemen over Signal, which is an encrypted app, but it is commercially available. I use it. Most people actually who do a lot of texting use it, not because we're plotting airstrikes, but because it's encrypted on both ends and it's just safer if you're talking about money or whatever. And there's another scandal, by the way, that broke today out of the Washington Post that we knew it. There had been hints of it, actually from an independent journalist, but that the administration has been using Signal more generally, and that's illegal because under the Presidential Records Act, everything that an administration does has to be archived for the historians and for the lawyers and for the future. And Signal is set to, or can be set to erase. Mine is not, but it can be set to erase, as the Signal chat that was exposed the other day was set to be erased. So the other one is, as I say, this Mike Waltz seat. Now those seats, and don't quote me on this because again, I don't have the numbers in front of me, is one of them, I believe, was plus 30 Republican and plus 33 Republican. So these are extraordinarily safe districts. And the Republican running at district at 6 basically didn't bother to run. He just thought he was going to be a shoo-in. And all of a sudden, his opponent, Josh Wheel, it looks like it should be Weil, but it's pronounced Wheel, a middle school math teacher who, you know, is basically saying all the right stuff, is running within the margin of error there, which would be extraordinary for him to win that seat. But similarly, in District 1, Gail Valamont, who is the Democrat running there, I mixed up her first and her last names when I wrote about her, similarly is way outraising her Republican opponent and is looking to make a really strong showing. Now politicos honestly would be shocked if the Democrats won there in plus 30 or plus 33 seats. It would be great if they did. But in that circumstance, anything less than a 0.15 loss is an earthquake. So again, you're always looking as somebody who studies politics at change. And if those extraordinarily Republican seats become instead of being crimson, they become pink, that's huge. So that's what we're watching there. And it's enough that Trump himself is now campaigning for the 2 Republicans down there. I mean, these are seats they thought were safe. Now the president himself is having to insert himself into that race. And that says that there is deep discontent around this country. But I'm not done yet. There is also the race in Wisconsin today. And that is a race for the state Supreme Court in Wisconsin. And, you're probably sitting there thinking, I'm from Nevada. Why do I care about the Supreme Court in Wisconsin? And the reason for that is because Wisconsin is one of those states that was crazy gerrymandered in favor of the Republicans. And what it means is that, and weirdly, Wisconsin, to me, I'm sorry, I don't do redistricting. Wisconsin has state maps and national maps, and they're not the same. And that matters because the state maps have been de-gerrymandered, if you will. And with the end of the gerrymander there, you have a much more representative legislature. But the congressional maps are still very heavily gerrymandered. So even though in the last election in 2024, the state of Wisconsin went pretty much 50-50 in terms of voting, the change between the two parties was really small. I don't remember off the top of my head what it was the kind of numbers that I can get my head around, really small number. So it's almost 50-50. The congressional delegation from Wisconsin to the United States House of Representatives is 75% Republican, because of these gerrymandered maps. So the state Supreme Court seat in the Wisconsin, the Supreme Court is elected each member is elected for 10 years. And the person who stepped down was they call these people liberals. And that's true in the real sense, is that I keep emphasizing this. A liberal is not a Democrat. Democrats and Republicans are political affiliations. A liberal in the United States of America can be a Republican, can be an independent, can be a Democrat, can be unaffiliated, whatever. A liberal is just somebody who believes that in order for individuals to have a fair shake in life, the government needs to regulate business, provide a basic social safety net, promote infrastructure, and protect civil rights. That is, make sure we're all equal before the law. That's it. So when you see the Susan Crawford, who is the person running for the Supreme Court in a nonpartisan, theoretically a nonpartisan election, called a liberal, and that doesn't mean she's a Democrat, although I kind of assume she is, but that's not the point. She hasn't said this, but it is expected that she will work on the courts to get rid of those skewed gerrymandered maps, that she will try to get the maps to a place where they are fairly representative of the vote in Wisconsin. But the person running against her is MAGA. He's very much about Trump. He talks all the time about Trump. He touts that he was going to do whatever Trump wants. And this election, because it's coming down to is these gerrymandered maps, is that if he gets elected, they will keep these gerrymandered maps that give Republicans at least 2 and possibly 3 extra seats in the House of Representatives. Why does that matter? Because right now, that's the difference between a Democratic House and a Republican House. And by the way, you see this in in a number of other states as well. This is why gerrymandering is such a terrible idea. So Elon Musk is pouring money into Wisconsin. He's put more than $20 million in at this point. He talks about this being the most important race in all of Western civilization or something. Kind of overblown, by the way. But they're throwing everything at that election, at this state Supreme Court election, because they recognize that if, in fact, you get maps in Wisconsin that reflect the voters' will, they will lose control of the House of Representatives, almost certainly. And so all of a sudden, what is, meaning no disrespect to Wisconsin, a bit of a sleepy election normally. Like, normally, do you care about the state Supreme Court election in Wisconsin? Probably not. But it has become huge because it is a test of whether or not Elon Musk can essentially buy an election. Can he throw, this is the most expensive state Supreme Court race in history, way above anybody else. And essentially Elon Musk is up there throwing money at it, including those $1 million checks, which went to 2 Republican operatives. That seems random. In order to essentially buy this election to stay in power. So that's actually what we're looking at in this moment in the United States of America, is we are seeing the destruction of our government in a way that looks to me very much as if people like Vladimir Putin had taken this country without a shot. And I think that's worth chewing on, by the way. But at stake is whether we're really ever going to be a democracy again, or whether we're going to let a few oligarchs like Elon Musk buy our elections, the way he did in 2024, when he put $291 million toward the Republicans, especially to Trump. And the top 7 donors to that election were all Republicans, and they put almost $1 billion with a B dollars into that election. And that there's a new report out from Open Secrets where you can look at those numbers to see where I'm at. By the way, George Soros was not a top 25 donor in the election at all. So when they talk about him, that's all projection. Literally, you've got Elon Musk standing there in Wisconsin, handing out $1 million checks to people in this election and saying that people opposing him are being funded by George Soros, who isn't, as I say, even in the top 25% from top 25 names for 2024. So what we're really looking at here is the protection of American democracy and whether or not we're going to let a very few people take it over. That's important, because even if you think you are a Republican and like Republican policies, once we no longer have a say in our government, it doesn't matter whether you like the policies or not. And you think about somebody like Vladimir Putin. He has honest supporters. I mean, supporters who honestly support him or had them early on. And, you know, if he says your son's going to fight in Ukraine at the front of a meat grinder, your son's going to fight at the front of a meat grinder. And that's an extreme, but that's what happens when you let a democracy go to authoritarianism. All right, so what do we do? What do we do in this moment? First of all, we take courage. We help each other out. I cannot thank you all enough for as much help as you've been giving me over this Facebook thing, and we'll see if we can figure it out. As I say, I'll continue to post there. I don't know if you're going to read it, be able to read it, but you can find me elsewhere. We help each other out. We emphasize not only that to push back, but because that's community. That's what this country is about. We help each other out, and we create those communities so we help each other out, and we take courage from that. You know, one of the things that I hear a lot is, you know, that I should back down and I should shut up. And I will tell you, the worst thing that you can do in the face of a bully is to shut up, because bullies look for weak targets. And, you know, having the courage to stand up and speak means you are not a weak target. So we reinforce each other. We have courage. We contribute what we can. You know, somewhere there's a quote from me talking about doing this with joy. And that's not me being like, you know, let's go hunt ducks with a rake. That's me saying that we know, those of us who study politics, that authoritarians cannot rise when people feel connected to a community and are engaged in things that make them happy. Authoritarians feed, well, like Dementors, right? They feed on fear and alienation and the desire to hurt people. So we do those things, but we do more than that. We speak up. We make sure that our voices and the things we care about are very much in the public sphere. We knock on doors for candidates that we support. We support people like Cory Booker. And one of the things that I'd like to emphasize with him in this moment, but not just him, there's plenty others. There's Chris Murphy. I love Jasmine Crockett. There's AOC, of course. There's Bernie Sanders. There's all these people, lawmakers who are speaking up. How did I even not say this? There's Janet Mills of Maine, you know, who God bless her, you know, but she's not the only one. J.B. Pritzker of Illinois. And I could just sit here listing people. But the point is that that I'm trying to make here is that us speaking up, Americans speaking up and saying what we want, not just what we don't want, but what we want, is how we create the leaders that will give us what we want. So, it's always worth remembering that Abraham Lincoln did not spring from the head of Zeus. In 1854 or 1855, if somebody said to you, who's going to be the next leader of the country, you would not have looked at a man who'd served one term in Congress and who was a corporate lawyer. We created Abraham Lincoln. The people at the time created Abraham Lincoln because they said what they wanted, and he listened, and he turned that into an ideology that could carry the country into the next era. And that's where we are in this moment right now. We are not only needing to stand against something, which is the dismantling of our democracy and the attempt of an oligarchy to take it over, which we do need to stand against, but we also need to articulate what that country looks like for us. And what you want is not going to be what I want, although we're going to overlap in a lot of places. I think it is bonkers that we don't have universal health care. I just think it's bonkers. I think it's universal that we don't have universal childcare. Those may not be your issues, but by throwing your issues into the mix and standing up for what you care about, you will create people who want to win your vote by doing those things. And in this moment, first of all, that is what I'm seeing, but it's also the way that we articulate what the future looks like, because this actually is my real concern right now. We're seeing our world torn apart. I mean, mangled is the word I used the other day. And I used that quite deliberately in my head, and I'll tell you why. That's because we get the word from a commercial laundering machine from the 19th century, although you can still buy mangles. They now have, I used to use one actually, someplace I used to work. They now have all kinds of safety features, so they're fine now. But we get the word because they were two superheated rollers that smashed together, and you would feed laundry into them, sheets, shirts, things like that, and they would iron them super, But before they had safety features on mangles in laundry businesses. I can't think of the word right now. Laundry businesses. The people who pushed that clothing into the mangle, they tended to be very poor white women or black men, because it was considered a lower class job. Sometimes it was girls, but usually it was, you went to the laundry as the bottom of your employment because it was such a horrible job. The rollers would catch their fingers and they would drag the arms inside, and people would lose their arms. And so they were mangled. And the reason I used that the other day was because we're turning back to the late 19th century, that world that Trump so idolizes, and mangling was in many ways a symbol of the abuse of that era. And so, sort of to amuse myself, I put it in a letter and said, our government is being mangled. It's being dragged into the maw of this machine that is dismantling it. But even though we need to stand up against that, what's going to come next? I mean, one of the things that really bothers me and frightens me in this moment is that the people like Russ Vought, who are behind Project 2025, are tearing everything apart, but they're not telling you what they want to put in its place. Similarly, the thing I watch with the Department of Government Efficiency and Elon Musk is they're out there talking about saving money, and they're not saving any money. But what they are doing is they're stripping all of our data from all of these agencies into their computers. And clearly they have a vision for what's going to happen then. When this moment comes and we're rebuilding, I want us to be the ones who decide what the United States of America looks like, not them, not Project 2025, which only 4% of Americans like, not the Department of Government Efficiency, which probably even fewer people like when they know what they're doing. I want us to decide that. And it's important to fill that space up with hope and with a vision for what the future looks like. And when it comes to that, we're never, any of us, going to get exactly what we wanted. But if we put enough of our minds together, what we will do is we will create political leaders who will be able to articulate a vision that enables us to move down that road. And that's the other important piece of what we should be doing in this moment. So have courage. Try and take this moment with joy. Make connections across the country. Speak up. Protest and envision the future. Because it feels to me like things are hopping right now, and it's only going to get more intense over the next several weeks. Anyway, thank you for being here. And I say we, somebody said you're a tech guru. I'm it, right? Like, I don't have a tech guru, but many people are helping me figure this out. We'll figure out Facebook or something. Tell people they can get the letters for free. It'll ask you for your credit card. You don't have to put that in. Share that stuff. Let's just flood the zone with all the good information we possibly can. And by the way, I'm not the only one doing this anymore. There's a number of good people who are talking about other aspects of our government. We're writing the history from the bottom up, and we're writing the news from the bottom up is the word I should have used. So let's get this stuff out there. And thank you for being here. I will do more of these. I will do shorter ones. I get off the road in about 2.5 weeks, and then it'll be a whole new era. Thank you for being here.